What I'm going to talk about is getting old, and I'm almost 73, and it's tough. We have our physical problems, we have aches and pains, we have to take medication, our short-term memory is going a little bit. There are a number of things, I don't think any of us escape them. But one of the very best things about being old is that we have excellent long-term memory. We love to tell stories about when we were young. We recall our childhood, and we can look back and kind of piece our lives together to figure out what led from here to there. Was it a coincidence? Was it God's hand? And there are three things that we kind of look at, or I do, and that is the people who influenced our lives greatly, the decisions we made, and the part God had in it. Some people may call it chance. I know that it was God. One other advantage, and it's not on the topic, but today we have our grandchildren with us. Haley is 6, Aiden is 6, and Haley is 9. And that is one of the biggest advantages of being old. You talk to any grandparent and they just glow, they want to show you pictures. We were talking the other night here at the end of VBS. One of the guys, I just said, how many grandchildren you have? Oh, pull out the phone, show all the pictures, and that's the way we are. But getting back to the topic, when I think of the people, first of all, who had great influence in my life in the beginning, I grew up in Boston, Jamaica Plain section. I had a brother and a sister, mother, father, intact family, 42 first cousins, a lot of aunts and uncles, and we all lived pretty much within a few miles of one another when we were young. So I had a lot of support, had a lot of fun with them. It was a good life. As I got older, you live in a city, you have some friends that end up judges, lawyers, businessmen, all the good things. But you also have your friends who are criminals, eventually, gangland slaying member. I had one of those. And so in the city, you have so many people that when you're in your early teenage years, you can go one way or another. And I went to a parochial school, very strict. Half the boys never made it through. If you did anything that was either nasty, you put a foul word in a note to someone, you were gone. Half the guys made it through. It ended up 2 times as many girls as guys in the school, so it was strict. Anyway, I credit most of all a nun, a Sister Rosenda Gill, who was my French teacher and my homeroom teacher, sort of like a guidance counselor. We didn't have a guidance counselor. I was a person who coasted academically. This was before Sputnik, before all the pressure on academics. And I did as little as I could. And I was more, and I'm not advising people to do that, young people. Today's different. You can't make as many mistakes in these days. But I used to coach. I love sports. I love the social life. I love part-time jobs. I always had a part-time job, sometimes 2 at a time. And I didn't really care for education. I did some of my work. And one day, she introduced a new concept in French. And it was a difficult one. And she said, Jacques, which she used to call me, go up to the front of the class. So I went up. Oh, what's going on? And the class started bombarding me with questions related to this concept. And we had an immersion program, so no English was ever spoken until the 3rd year of French. So you had to kind of think in the language. And I did pretty well with it. And she said, oh, he's my project. There's more to him than he's letting on. So she planned strategies for me, unbeknownst to me. She had other teachers doing certain things. Even in senior year, when I was taking a lighter load because I had completed all the requirements, she let me go in or talk to the physics teacher into letting me go in and audit a class, which was physics, instead of having another study period. And it was taught by MIT people. And they came as an experimental physics program that they were trying out. And later on, it paid off, because even though I audited, I did pay attention, and eventually have to take a course in college, and it paid dividends. Anyway, she understood guys very well, and she kind of turned me around, actually, and I started becoming, not a great student, but I was better. I had more interest. I started changing some of my friends. I deliver papers in the morning. I go to church every morning. I was a Catholic. And I started becoming interested in things of God. I was not a saint, as I don't think any of the teenagers are. But she changed that in me, and I wanted to do a little better. I went from class clown to class president for a couple of years. And when it came time to send a rep out for some kind of training, I'm not sure what it was called, but it was CYO, the Diocese of Boston. And we had to go to the seminars and then come back and actually teach and to, have discussions and lead the discussions, which got me interested in guidance. However, when I graduated, I applied at the last minute to Boston College. They asked for your major. Arts and sciences, continuation of high school. Education, who in their right mind would ever go into education? And the third one was business, which I said, I love that. Okay, so I went between the time of senior year and freshman year. I really felt like the people, in addition to her, there was a parish priest and an assistant basketball coach, who really influenced me positively and changed, especially when I looked at where some of my friends ended up. And I said, I'd love to do that for a life's work. That was my motivation. And I went in and tried to switch over to education, because that's where I had to go. And they wouldn't let me do it. They said, no, you chose it for a reason. I said, no, I didn't. I just checked it. They didn't believe people took things so casually, shall we say. Anyhow, I had to go a year in that. And then I was able to transfer, which I did. And then I had to choose a major. And I couldn't go into math because I missed a course in the freshman. I couldn't go into languages because I missed something. And I remember a saying that this nun had said once in one of those guidance classes. And that was, if you want to teach life, teach English, which was through literature. And I said, okay, I'll do English. Not that it was my favorite subject, but I did it. I ended up teaching English for 3 years, coaching football, later coaching track, and loved it, and loved the kids. The students were my motivation, whether they were the bright kids, the kids who struggled, they were the clowns. I knew them well. And many times you just say, you know, they'd be going to do something, and I'd look at them and smile, don't do it. Well, how do you know what we're thinking? You know, like a group in a cafeteria. I said, don't enter a criminal life, you'll be in jail in 30 seconds. You know, the look was all over their face, they were going to do something. Anyway, I always loved interacting with them. And then I got an opportunity out of the clear blue to go to BU and work as a career planning counselor. I had already just finished my master's, and and it just came out of the clear blue, a coincidence. I had an opportunity to meet with superintendents, assistant superintendents from all over outside the country as well. And I found out that they didn't have any of the constituencies with them when we went out to lunch. There were no school committee people, parents, teachers, community people. And they sort of let their hair down. And I met 2 people in the 2 years, and we had long lunches. We'd take a walk, we'd eat the faculty lounge, who were happy. And I worked with a guy who had had 2 heart attacks, and he had been a superintendent of schools. And I was starting a doctoral program that led me there, and I also started going out with my wife. And I said, I don't want that life. That is not for me. So I dropped that. I went back to counseling at Needham High School, and I was the chairman there. And along the way, I moved. and I moved into an apartment building, saw an ad in the paper, coincidence, maybe. One day, a tenant came down. I didn't meet anyone in the building. I knew no one. And she said, "Can you help me? I've got an emergency." Her emergency was her washing machine. The hose broke, water coming all over the place. She couldn't move it, so I moved it, fixed it for her, and went home downstairs. I was sick at the time. I had the flu. I looked horrendous. I'd been sick for 3 days. And a knock came the next night on my door. And a woman was there, and it was Delora. And she had this greatest smile and bright, warm eyes. And I'm telling you, I was in love. Right in the beginning. And I looked horrible. I'm saying, what's she think of me? Anyway, she said, "Thank you very much for helping." She was managing the apartment building at the time. "Thank you for helping the other person." Okay, then about a few weeks later, it was the January thaw, and there was a pipe that burst. Somebody left a spigot on outside, and the pipe burst, and I hear people out in the hallway, and they're doing something, and I was down on the bottom floor. So I went out, and I got to meet her again. We eventually started dating. And I wanted to go out with her as much as I could, and just had the weekends. And I said, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" "Sunday." "Oh, I go to church." "What do you mean you go to church?" "I thought, don't you go in the morning?" "Yeah, but I go at night too." "Oh, can I come?" was my response. And I had drifted away from the Catholic Church, no problem with it, no negative feelings. I just drifted after college. And I wasn't going anywhere. Go walking on the beach on Sunday mornings. That was my time probably with God, praying sometimes, or just appreciating the beauty. And I went to church, and eventually, we've been going for a while, and it was an Assembly of God church. I love the music, love the people. They seemed to really be kind to one another. They were open with their love with one another. And Delora was down in Florida visiting her parents. And I went to the church service. It was a little different. And as we would say, the Spirit was moving that night. Anyhow, I went forward, made a commitment to Jesus, and I was flying high that night. They say, you're high on Jesus. Well, I was. I couldn't wait to get home. I was living in Boston that time on Palm Ave near BU at the time. And I called Florida. And her dad, who were both ministers in Assemblies of God, she was a PK, double PK, I guess. The phone rang and the dad says, "That's Jim, he just got saved." It was true. And how that came out of him, I don't know, because he's not that kind of spooky guy, but he said it. And since then, I have try to make God the center of my life. I used to have a little trouble getting into the Bible, trying to read it every day, and I said to myself, I love reading, therefore, before I read anything else, I have to read 2 chapters of the Bible. And I've kept that. It was a gimmick for me, but it worked, so you can find your own. And we've done everything. Tithe first, make sure it's there, the first thing we do. And we've tried to live our lives as close to following God as we possibly can. And it has paid off. I'll give you a few examples. One of them, we were in a house that we bought, and we had one son, Jim. I'll tell you about that in a second. And we were looking to move. We bought it as sort of an investment, 4 years will go before he starts school. Supposedly there were 400 houses, it was a big town, on the market. And ours was priced a little higher than most around us. And so I put in the paper, I went out, I put a sign on the tree. We had chosen a church where we were going to live. We put that first. Then we looked for a house. And we just saw a sign one day, riding through Medfield, new homes, great. We looked at it, loved it, got it. The first place we looked at, actually. And then, when I put the sign on the tree, within 20 minutes, a neighbor came over and said, I didn't know you were moving. You selling the house? Yes. My brother would love this house. Done. Price we wanted, no hassle. Beautiful. Another time when God really intervened, I believe, is when Delora had Jim first. Then, 2 years later almost, she had an ectopic pregnancy, lost the baby. The doctor said 20 minutes later she would have been dead. And she thought she had the flu. 2 years later, we're back in the hospital, same thing. And I was down outside the operating room praying. And an image came to me of they're putting a sheet over her head. Anyway, about 15, 20 minutes later, and I didn't know how many people were being operated on, it was in the evening, a nurse came on. This is before they had all those signs. Please respect patients' confidentiality. Don't talk about patients in the hallway or elevators. And a custodian came by, and she was talking to him, and she said, oh, we have a tough one in there. I didn't know they were talking about Delora at all. Had no idea. Anyway, it turns out when they were rolling her out of the operating room, that she asked the doctor and anesthesiologist were there, why is my chest hurting so much? And he said, we'll talk about that later. And he never did. Anyway, 20 years later, we were getting an insurance policy, and our friend was doing the policy for us. And he said, Delora, you were dead. We didn't know that, but her chest was sore because they had to resuscitate her, had to revive her, and I guess they had a hard time doing so. But we didn't know for 20 years. And God, as I saw that, I was praying my heart out. And I know the prayers definitely, and God interceded, the prayers worked. And I can think of a more humorous one where prayer worked. I was teaching an adult Bible course in a home to a bunch of young couples from our church. And I had a friend who described himself, he worked with me as a counselor, as a non-practicing agnostic. That was the definition of himself. He didn't believe, but he didn't know whether he didn't want to believe, but he had a great sense of humor. And his wife was really hurting. She had gone to doctors and her back was killing her. And he knew my faith. He couldn't understand it. He liked me very much, but he said, one thing I don't know, I can't fathom with you is that you're a Christian. And it asked me questions like, do you tithe? And I said, what, Ron? This is going through a lunch line. Do you tithe? And he read about tithing. I said, yeah, I do. Oh. I can't, how can you do that? How can you do that? I said, it's easy. It's the first thing you do. I said, Ron, you spend more in commodities and gambling or whatever it was he was doing. Anyway, he said, Mary Ann is hurting so bad. Would you please, when you go to your Bible study, your group, would you have them pray? So we did. Anyhow, it was 2 days later. He didn't approach me the next morning. He said, Jim, did you meet the other night? Yeah. What time do you meet? I said, we start at 8. When were you praying? I said, around 8:15. Ah. That's when Mary Ann stopped having pain. And it just was something for him. Now, he never became a Christian. But boy, he changed a little, and then he started asking more questions. And you have influence on people. All my students, a number of them knew I was a Christian because they'd see the Bible. All my books were, Bible was like this on the side. And a lot of the kids who were Christians would spot it, and they could talk to me. You can't talk to them about it. You can't bring up subjects like that. But praying for students, and a lot of teachers do it, believe it or not, praying for their success, for your wisdom in working with them. And I don't know how many times God intervened in situations, and I just know that throughout my life, He has been number one. I've got the support of Delora, and it's exceptionally important. And we have 2 wonderful grandchildren. And one of the things, okay, one thing, just tell me the story. It's only a minute.
Is it a story?
It's a story. It's very fast. No, I'll get out of here. Anyway, a woman can lead you to the Lord.